We will now begin our sixth and final lecture in the tidyr section of the course. And we will start, you should now have completed, let's see, 11, I believe, exercises. So there were 2 exercises at the end of the last section, and I step you through those in the document that goes along with the lecture notes. So be sure you have completed those before you start this section. You will be tidying up the weather data set and the billboard data set as part of those exercises. Now we're going to look at multiple observations per row. So we are going to start by entering this data set called family. And family then looks like this. So you can see that this case, the name of the column that you want to appear in the output is part of the column name in the input. In other words, we want the date of birth, and we want child 1 and child 2 separated out. So we will start by mutating and we're just going to turn those into date objects, because as we started out, those were character objects. So we've just changed the type of those objects to start with. But we have 2 pieces of information for each child. We have the date of birth and the gender. So these need to go into separate columns for the result. So we're going to supply multiple variables to names2, and we're going to use names underscore SEP to split up each variable name. Now we're going to use the special name dot value to tell pivot longer that part of the column name specifies the value being measured, which will become a variable in the output. So if we look at this, we will do everything but family. So we're going to pivot longer these 4 columns. The names are going to go to the value, date of birth, and child. And the separator is the underscore. So we can see that we get then the date of birth and the gender, because our names before, let's look back up, were DOB underscore child 1, gender child 1. So now we have DOB and gender, and the child 1, child 2 part goes into the child part, and the value part comes from the second part of the name. You are now going to do the same thing for your assignment with the Anscombe data set. So let's look briefly at what that looks like. And you can see that the X's and the Y's we want to separate out. So you are going to take everything and change those, and you're going to use names2 with the dot value, and then you're going to have the names pattern, and everything else is going to be what set does it belong to, set 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, so that's going to be exercise 12. And exercise 13 is for you to look at the World Bank population data set. So let's start at looking at that. And this is the data set you are going to want to tidy. So you will see that these are going to, you're going to pivot longer from these, but then you're going to look at these indicators, and you're going to need to change those and use some sort of separator possibly, and maybe a pivot wider to get that to look like the result that you're wanting. And the answer for the result should be in the workbook, so you can see what you're aiming for. Lastly, we're going to cover a specification by hand. So this means, let's look at the construction data set. Here I want to use the number of units, and I also want to figure the region. So what I can do is I can create a specification like this, and a spec is telling me what units I'm going to divide into and what regions I'm going to divide into. And if I apply spec to my data set, so if I do construction, then pivot longer, and I just give it the specification, because I saved that specification as spec, I get an error. I got an error because I need not pivot longer anymore, but pivot longer spec. I have to use a different form, a different verb there, and then I in fact get my data reformatted and reshaped the way that I wanted. You can use this to be more precise about how to pivot longer, and the answer will give us will have a different shape. So I will have the number of rows of my original data frame times the number of rows of my specification, and my number of columns will change as well. So those details are in the handout, and you can go to the vignette online as well to get more information. That concludes our videos on tidyr. Please see me if you have questions.